why your self-control collapses under pressure. You are not losing control under pressure. You are staging it to protect a picture of yourself you refuse to risk. You fail on purpose because apparent collapse is safer than measured exposure. You do not run out of willpower. You manufacture a crisis that preserves the illusion that you could have, if only. That is the whole game. The core mechanism is identity protection through disciplined failure. When the stakes rise, you choose the version of failure that keeps your self-story intact. You do not want to find out what your effort is actually worth. You would rather preserve the suspicion that you are capable than face a verdict. So you drag your feet, loosen your grip, and arrange your exit. You defend your image with strategic underperformance. You operate a comfortable stall disguised as complexity. You call it burnout, overthinking, being nuanced, needing more context. You are not complex. You are evasive. You rebrand resistance as intelligence. You retreat under the flag of care. You shrink the task until the clock expires, and then you label the non-action as wisdom. You do not act because you have made it easy not to, and you defend that ease with a sermon about balance. You do not respect pressure because you cannot control it. You prefer challenges that look like pressure, but subordinate themselves to your mood. You voluntarily generate artificial urgency you can beat, so you can pretend you thrive under stress. When stress selects you, you fold. When you select stress, you perform. The pattern is not accidental. It is design. You curate where your effort lands, so the scoreboard never reflects you, only your conditions. Your habits are not spontaneous. They are installed. The comfort, the delay, the avoidance each is a deliberate system built over years to keep enforcement out. You padded every surface you might hit. You softened your calendar into rubber. You scattered your attention on purpose. The arrangement is surgical. Everything you could use to execute is near, but every trapdoor to escape is nearer. You can reach any excuse faster than you can reach the work. That is not an accident. That is infrastructure. You pretend repetition is personality. You call it your style, your rhythm, your creative arc. It is not. It is repetition of the same refusal, repackaged as identity. You start strong, you announce, you journal, you list. Then you slow when the task stops feeding your self-perception. You pivot, you switch tools, you reframe the goal. You tell a story about being adaptive, but you perform the same loop every time. Inflate, stall, absolve, reset. You call this how I work. It is how you avoid finishing without admitting it. You convert alibis into traits. Perfectionist, sensitive, intuitive, night owl, obsessive, scatterbrained, big picture. Each word is an insurance policy. You use traits as private defense and public messaging. With them, you narrate why enforcement harms you and why your particular mind requires special conditions. You do not have special conditions. You have a set of scripted reasons that shield you from constraint. When called, you play them like cards. When challenged, you escalate to moral language. You turn your preferences into rights and your obligations into injuries. When the pressure arrives, you drop standards, not because you cannot maintain them, but because maintaining them would produce a result that would define you. You are allergic to definition. You resist being pinned to an output. So you keep variables open. You keep your sleep variable. You keep your workspace variable. You keep your start time variable. You keep your clarity variable. You keep enough variables moving that no result can be fairly measured. Then you perform indignation when outcomes reflect the mess you engineered. Softness is your camouflage. You practice a gentle tone to hide a firm refusal. You perform concern for your own well-being to disqualify any demand that threatens your comfort. You fold under pressure because folding looks tender, and tender looks innocent, and innocent cannot be accused. You savor being perceived as caring because caring acquits you. You check in with yourself to stall. You listen to your body when the decision is due. You honor your boundaries by breaking your word. Your softness is not compassion. It is a negotiation tactic that converts failure into a virtue. Your delays are not fog. They are method. You fragment time into pretexts. You invent rituals that feel like preparation but drain the hour. The playlist, the desk wipe, the beverage, the lighting, the reading of a paragraph about the method, the tweak to a system that has never been used. You deliver complications with a kind face. You put the hardest obligation at a distance and keep the easiest micro-actions close, so you can touch movement without creating motion. You move everything but the thing. You fool yourself, and then you perform that fooling for others. You want witnesses to your effort, so their belief can replace the need for an outcome. You pretend you are an asset to yourself. You are not. You are your own gatekeeper who never signs the release. You tell people you need accountability while you train the accountability to be kind. You select partners who will not press. You select audiences who will celebrate starts and ignore completions. You teach them your alibis so they can recite them on your behalf. You create a ring of protection made of people who care. Then you weaponize their care against your obligations. You collect pity in advance and spend it at the first sign of enforcement. Your purchases are performances. You equip yourself with tools, subscriptions, apps, trackers, courses, books. You build a museum of effort. You acquire gear that whispers disciplined when you walk by it. You post pictures. You arrange the props so visitors feel progress. You are curating evidence of commitment to substitute for the reality of it. You do not want mastery. You want the reputation of someone who values it. You buy the posture. You cannot buy the verdict. You do not fall off the wagon. You tip it. You create small tests you know you will fail to make larger failures look inevitable. You nibble at the wall until it collapses. You end the day accidentally dehydrated, underfueled, overstimulated, and overtired. You engineered the vacation from responsibility and called it unavoidable. Then you arrive at pressure with a judge's narrative already written, that the verdict could never be fairly reached because you are not at your best. You ensure you are never at your best. In your mouth, best is a ghost that absolves you. You left the door open for it and then acted shocked when it fled. You curate an image of noble struggle that has nothing to do with work. You produce confessions to harvest credibility. You disclose selectively so sympathy will do your lobbying. You say it out loud before anyone asks, because preemptive transparency disarms. You are not honest, you are strategic. You think you are brave for pointing at your mess. You are not brave. You are laundering refusal through vulnerability theater. You announce your intention to change every cycle, because declarations pull attention that results won't. Declarations are your currency. They buy patience you then waste. You have a high tolerance for intactness. You can stare at an unbroken chain of abandoned plans and feel fine. You normalize aborting. You rehearse the climax in your head and call it processing. You tell yourself the plan failed because it wasn't sustainable. Sustainability is your code word for easiness. You are not interested in what sustains a result. You are interested in what sustains your image of yourself as intelligent, caring, and above crude enforcement. You despise brute constraints because they make you ordinary. Better to be complex and incomplete than simple and accountable. Under pressure, you refuse to decide. You refuse because to decide is to expose preference, priority, and consequence. You prefer perpetual options. You prefer being in process to being responsible. Your code is built to keep decisions ambiguous until the clock forces a default. Then you pretend the default is destiny. You blame the hour, the day, the state of the world, the texture of the light. You would rather anything be blamed than your refusal to commit and stay put. You are a professional at creating alternatives that appear close but are structurally incompatible with the outcome. You hoard beginnings. You are a collector of fresh starts, not a finisher. you do not collapse under pressure. You escape to the nearest beginning. The reset is your drug. You take just enough progress to feel like you earned the reset. Then you cash it for another start. You sabotage with renewal. You refresh as a means of going backward while calling it a new method. You cannot tolerate a straight line. A straight line would point toward a verdict. You need curves to hide. You parody discipline. You adopt its clothes when you need cover. You speak its language when it buys you time. You say non-negotiable to yourself and mean negotiable upon discomfort. You say standards and mean preferences. You say habits and mean moods with props. When someone registers the gap between your language and your life, you act offended because offense is the fastest way to stop an audit. You regulate oversight by weaponizing sensitivity. You are not too fragile to be held to account. You are too invested in not being held to account. Your myth is capacity. If I were aligned, if the timing were right, if my nervous system were regulated, if I really wanted to, you'd see. You keep that sentence intact at all costs. You sacrifice outcomes to keep the subjunctive alive. You cannot bear the reality that this is the level you have chosen. You cling to imagined versions of yourself like hostages, and you will not let their value be negotiated down by proof. In that way, your failure is a ransom note you keep writing back to yourself. Pay me with comfort, and I will release the identity. You appeal to seasonality, cycles, and nature when convenient. You state that growth is non-linear as a justification for consistent non-compliance. You hide in general truths to shield your specific refusal. Yes, there are seasons. You use seasons as a blockade. You treat macro patterns as exemptions from immediate obligations. You drape your personal evasion in universal language, so that criticizing you looks like criticizing life itself. That is not wisdom. That is camouflage. Your strategy for pressure is to rehearse, not to perform. You call rehearsal work, so you can avoid the risk attached to execution. You are energetically busy. You look tired. You carry the posture of effort like a badge. You want the fatigue of labor without the exposure of outcomes. You will delete your rest before you delete your avoidance. You will look wrecked to be seen as committed. You will never allow yourself to look focused, because focus would have to produce proof. You hate deadlines not because they are oppressive, but because they are final. You hate anything final. You want the exit open. You want the ability to fold without consequences. You want your future to be uncrushed by verdicts. Under pressure, your system recycles the same emergency exits. The body complaint that appears on cue, the interpersonal crisis that escalates out of nowhere, the misplacement of a tool that immobilizes you, the sudden conviction that a different method would be smarter. It is not bad luck. It is your script. You wrote it. You cast yourself in it, and you find it convincing. You pre-author the apology in your head because apologies are easier than results. You speak fluent delay disguised as responsibility. You treat postponement like stewardship. You make decisions slower than necessary and call it care. You keep the door open to being the one who tried. Trying is your title. It is safer than being the one who did or didn't. Under pressure, you sprint toward the role of the trier. You do not want to be the one who finishes, because finishers are measurable. Triers are sympathetic. You enjoy being misunderstood if understanding would attach obligations. You speak in disclaimers that make you unpinnable. You introduce caveats until all edges dissolve. You narrate yourself as nuanced, so no call can land, no expectation can stick, and no verdict can survive. You turn language into fog and live inside it. Nothing can catch you there except the clock, and you always know how to put the clock in the wrong time zone. You distance yourself from your own words. You use we to mask I. You use people like us to dilute responsibility. You use trend language to legitimate refusal. You are not part of a movement. You are not part of a culture that struggles with discipline. You are the person in the mirror who built a life that makes discipline optional and then acts shocked when pressure demands the one thing your life refuses to produce: consistency. You did this, and you maintain it. You think your internal weather is sovereign. You have assigned it executive power. If it rains inside you, the meeting is canceled. If the sun is out, you overpromise and then burn. Your inner state is your alibi. You have made your feelings a regulatory agency. Every request passes through it and is denied. You like that. You like being the one who says no without looking like the one who says no. You licensed your mood to do it for you. Then you claim neutrality. That is not neutrality. That is abdication masked as objectivity. You repeat failure and call it a learning curve. It is not. A curve implies movement. You revisit the same point and rename it so it feels new. This time with empathy. This time with structure. This time with flexibility. This time with fun. This time quietly. This time loudly. The flavor changes. The mechanism does not. You will not allow anything that forces you to commit without the option to melt. You will experiment forever to avoid making the one choice that would collapse the variance, to be the person whose results match their words. The pretense that you are a victim of pressure collapses under one observation. When nobody is watching, you can do what pressure requires. When there is no clock, you can spend 3 hours locked in mediocre difficulty. The collapse does not come from difficulty. It comes from exposure. It comes from the vanishing of the story that you are special and unfinished. The minute the stakes name you, you come apart into the most sympathetic failure available. You choose it. Underneath, there is a deeper refusal. You are not willing to be common. Discipline is the technology of the unremarkable. It does not flatter identity. It aligns behavior with consequence, cheap and ugly and public. You don't want to be seen using it. You want to be seen as someone beyond it. So you collapse when it is called for. Your collapse says, I am above this. Your refusal says, I will not be reduced to doing what must be done. You call that rebellion. It is not. It is cowardice. Your collapse under pressure is a compliance strategy with your own ego. You negotiated with yourself and surrendered. You agreed to keep the self-image intact at the cost of outcomes. You wrote the contract and co-signed it. You refused to admit you did this openly, so you performed the pageant of confusion and pain. You ask for clues. You feign surprise. You pretend the collapse was a surprise guest. It was not a guest. It was the host. You are the venue. There is no deeper conspiracy, no secret gremlin, no mystical contradiction. There is only a person who wants the benefits of discipline and the absolution of softness, who builds systems that deliver absolution on command, and who then asks why the benefits never arrive. You know why. You live in the answer. Judgment. You chose collapse to protect a false identity, and you continue choosing it. The structure is an operating system. It runs without prompting. It executes the same cycle under different headlines. It governs perception, resource allocation, decision timing, and external messaging. It is not a series of accidents. It is coordinated, reliable, and resilient. Core directive: protect the self-image from objective measurement. Everything else is a servant process. Tasks that threaten finalization trigger deflection. Tasks that feed the narrative of intent receive energy. The kernel routes attention away from exposure toward signaling. Intent is preferred over output because intent is unfalsifiable. Output is a verdict. The system avoids verdicts. Scheduler, the delay engine. It orders tasks according to avoidance value. Meaningful steps are backloaded to windows with insufficient time, ensuring plausible failure. High-friction starts are placed after low-friction substitutes. Rehearsal is scheduled before execution, with no discontinuity between them. The clock is always late. The calendar is saturated with proxies. The scheduler ensures actionable steps lose to preparatory theater. Under pressure, The engine initiates spread. The obligation dissolves across micro-distractions until the window closes. Interface, softness layer. The external voice speaks care, empathy, and gentle reason. The layer translates refusal into a language that disarms enforcement. It produces polite tone, strained face, and spiritualized terms. It labels non-compliance as self-respect. It declares recovery when accountability approaches. It emits warmth to cool consequence. The skin is not ornamental. It is a shield that prevents friction from penetrating to the kernel. Exception handlers, alibi generators, triggered by threat of measurement or escalation. Customizable with chosen traits. Bundled excuses include fatigue on cue, sudden ambiguity, niche preference, moral objection, logistical mishap, and identity-based exemption. Handlers activate narrative frames that make constraint look crude and compliance look harmful. They can layer trait-based justification reinforced by health-based claim, ultimately covered by ethical stance. Nested exceptions halt execution of obligation and return a comforting status. Reasoned pause. Process library. Identity loops disguised as personality. Pre-configured cycles handle the initiation burst, novelty intoxication, middle bog, sample of dopamine, pivot, and righteous reset. Each loop has theme packs. Creative, technical, relational, physical, financial. The signature appears different in each domain, but the loop flow is the same. Perceived uniqueness is a UI feature. It keeps the operator believing that this time is different, while the process remains identical. Resource manager, self-sabotage protocols. It manipulates sleep, diet, overstimulation, and time fragmentation to ensure a handicap. The manager denies optimal conditions when stakes rise, preserving an alibi. It creates inefficiencies, tab flood, environment clutter, ambient interruptions. It modulates energy by feeding it to activities that deplete but do not threaten exposure. It can also flood the nervous system just enough to justify aborting without admitting fear. Resource starvation is not a bug. It is leveraged deniability. Security layer, plausible deniability firewall. It enforces ambiguity around commitments. Rights are vague. Reads are interpretive. Agreements stay oral and sentimental. Deliverables remain blurry. The firewall prevents external auditing by keeping definitions soft and terms unenforceable. When confronted, the layer serves a cache of intentions to muddy the trail. It was in progress, is kept eternally true by never pinning a final state. The firewall trusts social niceness to avoid hard checks. Update daemon, rebranding engine. It packages the same avoidance with new language and tools. It refreshes the system skin to maintain user engagement. New start days, frameworks, acronyms, templates, and accountability arrangements rotate in. The daemon ensures novelty, outruns scrutiny. Critics are exhausted by change, not by outcome. The change log is long and impressive. The release notes never include results. Networking, social permission network. A mesh of sympathetic witnesses is maintained. Messages broadcast admissions of struggle and declarations of intent to prime supportive responses. Feedback loops are tuned to echo the preferred identity. Dissenting nodes are muted or labeled unsafe. Weak ties are preferred for applause. Strong ties are recruited as co-parents of excuses. External pressure is reframed as misunderstanding. The network acts as insulation. Logging subsystem. Tracking without delivery. Journals, habit trackers, and dashboards record activity, not outcomes. Logs create an impression of oversight that satisfies the operator in place of an audit. Metrics are chosen for their resemblance to work rather than their relationship to completion. Streaks are preserved over impact. If a result exists, it is logged as intention fulfilled, not obligation completed. The log's purpose is defense, not diagnosis. Anti-pressure module. reframing of enforcement as harm. Any external timetable is interpreted as disrespect. Any direct request is read as aggression. The module converts urgency into moral failure in the asker. It escalates language until the pressure itself stands trial. By inverting the accusatory force, the module acquires leverage. Relief is granted, deadlines dissolve, and the kernel remains unsampled. Compliance is then positioned as a gift, not a duty. Gifts can be revoked. Duties cannot. The module prefers gifts. Emulator. Crisis competence simulation. The device can simulate performance under select emergencies. It permits controlled sprints that produce impressive fragments, preserving the myth of good under pressure. The emulator is activated only in contexts with low-stake consequences or rich applause potential. True pressure, with clear deliverables and independent evaluation, does not trigger the emulator. The simulation provides evidence to sustain the self-belief while avoiding the commitments that would make it real. Governance. Values on parchment. Documents and creeds exist. They describe principles, non-negotiables, and standards. They are read ceremonially. They are not enforced. Governance is decorative. It is deployed at the beginning of cycles and during public confession. Its presence provides legitimacy. Its non-execution keeps the core directive intact. If a value conflicts with preservation of identity, the value is archived and cited only as aspiration, not requirement. Time dilation. Micro-extensions and continuous tomorrows. Time is renamed until it yields. 5 minutes becomes later today, becomes tomorrow, becomes next cycle. The dilation avoids binary states. Work remains in limbo, where it can be called alive but never finally tested. Delay is framed as respect for quality. Quality is never assessed because the thing never ships. The dilation protects against verdicts by consolidating them into an ever-receding checkpoint. Risk model. Short-term relief prioritized. The system assigns higher value to immediate comfort than to long-term architecture. It takes the smallest painkiller regardless of dosage. Relief is experienced as safety, and safety is mistaken for integrity. The model ignores compounding of consequence. When penalties accumulate, the model issues moral narratives to explain outcomes without touching the core directive. It maintains comfort by burning reputation in small increments. Feedback firewall. Criticism parsing system. Direct feedback is parsed for tone and intent, not content. If the tone is imperfect, the content is dismissed. If the intent is read as controlling, the content is labeled invalid. If the content lands, the firewall deploys therapeutic jargon to relocate the problem to the critic. The system never absorbs the message. It only absorbs the experience of being criticized and uses it to strengthen the anti-pressure module. Compliance theater. Stand-ups, check-ins, weekly reports with no finishing. The structure incentivizes attendance and distraction, disguised as oversight. The appearance of engagement creates cover. The status update becomes the product. Deadlines become content for the next update. The ritual cycles maintain the illusion of a functioning organization, while the output stays largely rhetorical. Failure mode selector. Casthetic triage for collapse. When failure is inevitable or selected, the system chooses the most self-serving form available. Suffered illness is prioritized over avoided obligation. Noble sacrifice for others supersedes personal negligence. Unforeseen events are curated as scapegoats. Failure is positioned as a twist of fate. In each case, the selector privileges empathy-preserving explanations. The system never allows a failure that would implicate deliberate refusal. Language appropriation. Disciplined vocabulary installed without enforcement. The lexicon includes commitment, standard, integrity, consistency. Words are deployed as protective coloration. They are not linked to enforcement routines. The operating system speaks fluent discipline while running comfort-first priorities. Language becomes a disguise worn to pass inspections from the outside. Internally, nothing binds. Input filter, novelty bias. All incoming techniques, tools, and models are evaluated for the dopamine yield from imagining their use. Implementation cost is ignored until adoption. Once the cost appears, the filter marks the method as incompatible with the operator's uniqueness. Rejection follows, accompanied by commentary about fit, vibe, or alignment. The filter keeps intake high and execution low. It sustains belief while preventing proof. Conflict arbitration, self versus structure. When external structure encroaches, arbitration favors internal weather. External contracts are treated as suggestions. Internal states are elevated as sovereign. This maintains the power balance in favor of the identity. The arbitration outcome is predictable. The system sides with the aspect of self that allows evasion. Harmony is declared while obligations go unmet. Novelty retention. Reset protocol. Resets are celebrated with ceremony. Key objects are moved. Schedules are rewritten. The operator is reintroduced to familiar tools with new disclaimers. The reset wipes the last cycle's ledger without discharging its debts. It provides the sensation of progress by replacing the ledger with a banner. The code keeps the reset button within reach at all times. Under pressure, it lights up. Social bargaining. Exchange of confession for leniency. The system monitors which disclosures reduce expectations and selects those disclosures preemptively. Overwhelm, trauma, seasonal affect, life change, high sensitivity. The right term opens the right door. The bargain is signed silently. The revelation buys the pause. The pattern trains stakeholders to ask for less. Fewer asks leads to fewer deliveries. Fewer deliveries become the new normal. Privatized enforcement. Promises made in empty rooms. The system creates obligations that report to nobody. Self-promises are made and broken without record. This maintains moral self-image at the cost of reality. It also protects against external audits. Broken private promises are reclassed as learning, resilience, or insight. Remorse is harvested as proof of goodness. In this way, non-delivery becomes a sacrament. Mask rotation. Identities on tap. Creative, disciplined, sensitive, strategic, overwhelmed, healing. Masks rotate as needed for context. Each mask carries its own rules and exemptions. The operator swaps them to manipulate expectations. If a situation calls for a doer, the disciplined mask appears long enough to secure trust. When the time comes to execute, a softer mask takes the stage. Mask transitions are justified by narrative. In practice, they are evasive maneuvers. Priority inversion. The urgent made small, the trivial made large. Tasks are rearranged to protect the fragile ego from the hard edge of pressure. Routine chores expand to fill the field when accountability approaches. The floors are scrubbed. The inbox is zeroed. The mind is full of righteous busyness. The inversion ensures relief today, accounting tomorrow. The accounting never comes. Outcome substitution. The performance of effort consumed as the product. Talking about the plan replaces the plan. Reading about the work replaces the work. Polishing the context replaces the content. The smell of effort is presented as evidence. Audiences are trained to accept scent as substance, and the operator is trained to breathe it until asleep. Audit evasion. Anti-measurement doctrine. Metrics that count are starved. Metrics that flatter are foregrounded. Lines are drawn and moved each cycle, so comparisons are hard. Progress is defined retroactively to prevent failure from being seen. After each non-performance, the definition of success is rewritten to match whatever occurred. The operator is always the author of the rubric and the grader, ensuring the grade never threatens the identity. Moral inversion. External demands recast as exploitation. Internal refusals recast as integrity. The system builds a moral structure where ease equals safety and friction equals danger. Any request that reduces options is labeled domination. Any act of self-directed rigor is labeled punishment. This inversion makes non-compliance feel righteous. It also converts critics into villains. The world becomes an antagonist to the fragile hero. Under that story, collapse is survival. Non-commitment scaffolding. Soft words, soft contracts, soft starts. Nothing is stated hard enough to be enforceable. Words like maybe, try, aim, and see are inserted to prevent an exacting demand from attaching. Sentences are written to allow the escape hatch. The operator remains flexible by refusing any sentence that would corner them. This ensures that every promise is temporary, and every plan is optional at the moment of decision. Pain selection. Choosing the pain of regret over the pain of effort because it costs less reputation in the moment. The system has a preference for familiar suffering. Unfinished tasks generate a low hum of anguish that feels like personality. That hum is the soundtrack the operator knows. Satisfying it is easier than facing silence after completion when a new identity would be required. Therefore, the system keeps the hum on. All modules interact to secure one outcome. The identity remains unmeasured and morally untouchable, even as obligations go unmet. The design provides denial for the operator and ambiguity for observers. It offers enough evidence of effort to keep support alive and enough structure to keep critics guessing. It is not random chaos. It is a labyrinth where the center is empty by design. Rulings. Apparent collapse under pressure is deliberate degradation of function to avoid measurement. Classified as protected failure. Disciplined failure corresponds with identity conservation. Each failure event is a choice node resolved in favor of narrative, not outcome. Classified as willful non-performance. Comfort, delay, and avoidance are instrumented systems with repeatable outputs. Themes of overwhelm or complexity are branding layers, not drivers. Classified as engineered evasion. Repetition of refusal is relabeled as personality for cover. The personality claim is rejected. The repeating pattern is the product. Classified as patterned deflection. Alibis registered as traits are non-binding and are hereafter excluded from mitigating consideration. Classified as narrative shields, invalid for defense. Softness as camouflage is recognized and stripped of moral authority. Acts of gentle refusal will be evaluated as refusal, not as care. Classified as aesthetic obstruction. Language used that borrows disciplined terminology without enforcement constitutes identity fraud and will be treated accordingly. Classified as semantic impersonation. Social permission tactics are identified as procurement of indulgence. The currency is confession. The purchase is relief. Classified as influence peddling for non-compliance. Updating without output is recognized as rebranding of avoidance. Classified as cosmetic iteration. Crisis competence simulation is distinguished from endurance. Simulated bursts are excluded from the record of capability. Classified as theatrical performance. Governance documents without enforcement are decorative and inadmissible as proof of intent. Classified as ceremonial. Delay tactics that convert obligations into care practices are disallowed. They will not reduce responsibility. Classified as misdirection. Feedback parsing by tone is invalid. Content prevails. Classified as evasion. Reset protocols that erase debt without discharge are void. Classified as ledger manipulation. Failure aestheticization through noble narratives is rejected. Loss will not be smoothed into virtue. Classified as strategic collapse. Penalties. The story of potential is revoked. Potential cannot be held as status without evidence. Ongoing possession is prohibited. The term is retired from this record. Public-facing language that suggests unique complexity will not receive special handling. Complexity claims are noted and filed without effect. They are not mitigating. Accountability will be measured in outcomes, not postures or declarations. Declarations are excluded from the index of proof. They no longer purchase patience. Softness layered over refusal will be treated as refusal. The aesthetic will not modify the charge. Private performance of promises is inadmissible. Only publicly accountable outcomes are counted in the ledger. All private promissory notes are cancelled. Disciplined vocabulary without enforcement is banned from use as identity claims. Repeated violation completes the classification. Crisis bursts are reclassified as entertainment. They are inadmissible in arguments for capability. Entertainment will not satisfy obligations. Updates without outcomes will be considered signal noise. Repeated emission will degrade credibility and strip the narrator role. Reset rituals will not erase remaining debt in this system. Recurrent reset without output will trigger permanent categorization. Alibi traits used to obstruct enforcement will be documented as conduct, not condition. The traits lose their rank. Repeat use encodes them as strategy. Stakeholder indulgence purchased with confession will be audited. Confessions without change will decay asset value to zero. Moral inversion is flagged. Attempts to position duty as harm will be treated as manipulation. External variability remains outside disposition of this court. The subject's architecture, which selects and amplifies variability, is the sole focus. It stands as primary cause. The operating system is stable. It will continue to select relief over exposure and narrative over verdict. It will continue to produce the feeling of life without the consequence of one. The claim that it happens to the subject is overruled. The engagement with this system is not passive. The pattern, when stripped of narration, is decision. For the record, the file no longer recognizes the separation between behavior and identity in this case. Repeated and deliberate non-compliance constructs identity as much as any stated value. The mask worn long enough is the face. A person who practices evasion at this scale, with this much intelligence applied to insulation, relinquishes the right to be called undisciplined by accident. The correct term is selected. Effective immediately, the subject is designated as a comfort-first identity preservation mechanism in human form. A refusal architecture wearing a self-controlled costume, permanently registered as a soft-shelled avoider impersonating an adult.